Good morning, dear friends. Ukraine Crisis Media Center starts its work with discussion. The topic is the local elections 2020 and COVID-19. So we continue discussions organized by UCMC in the framework of DOBRE project. Our speakers are People's Deputy Vitaliy Bezgin. Also, Viktor Lyashko will join us. Then we have Andriy, Gevko, a member of CEC, and also Lyubchenko, director of IFES Ukraine, and Denis Rybachok, analyst of Voters Committee, and Zoya, Lebid, OPORA election monitoring coordinator in Kirovohrad, Oblast. So this round table is broadcast through DOBRE and UCMC pages and UCMC channel. You may watch us in Ukrainian and in English. I would like to remind to the audience that you may provide your questions in comment section. And Mr. Lyashko, that will join us soon, will work with us only for 40 minutes. And you may ask questions. And please formulate your questions and send them. So, first question about Ukrainian legislation concerning holding elections in pandemic conditions, and the response to the main task concerning implementation of voters' rights guaranteed by Constitution, and from the other side, protection of rights for health, safety and life. We start with the People's Deputy. Vitaliy, you are given the floor. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this invitation. About legislation, and this is not ideal. There are some articles of Constitution concerning this. The norms of Constitution say that each person has a right to elect and be elected. We should adhere to this right, and we should also understand COVID situation that we face right now. About legislation concerning elections in pandemic times, we all know that draft law 4117 was not voted for. There were some changes in the agenda, and calendar changed, and it was not even considered in committee. That's why the situation looks not very good, and we believe that there will be a meeting on the 20th of October concerning the issues of the budget. And maybe we should also have some earlier discussions about other aspects. The key aspect here concerns local elections. We have representatives of association, and Oleksandr, our colleague, knows that this is about a resolution of the government concerning local governance, and we believe that local government bodies, they face the problems, and there was a question of the budget. We have simultaneous translation now, that's why it's rather high pace. Yeah. Look, so this government resolution, it provides big responsibility to the local government, and we believe that this is wrong, because local government bodies, they were the first who faced pandemic, and they lost part of their budgets, and there was sequester of the budget that hit them heavily, and there will be an additional burden, and this won't bring positive things concerning implementation of programs to support our citizens during elections, and this will increase tension between the center and representatives at a local level, and the situation is politicized in the context of electoral campaign. So the association and people deputies together, we will be able to find a compromise with the government and to reach a balanced solution. About legislative changes, I hope that despite big number of people who got ill in the parliament, we will be able to meet and to vote for some things. So I believe that I will be able to answer the questions later on. Andriy, Gevko now will be given the floor. So your colleague said that on the 30th draft law was not voted for. We included it on the agenda of the session. It should have been considered by the committee and should be introduced to the hall on Thursday, but our calendar changed and this influenced. CEC addressed with this issue to the parliament, to the president, with a proposal that were included in the draft law, and on the 18th this draft law appeared, and the Verkhovna Rada went on quarantine because of coronavirus. Andriy, please tell us what are next steps if this meeting, if there won't be this meeting, what will happen next? Good morning. So we will continue with our lives because there were many gaps in the process, in legislation, and we've regulated it by our explanations, by our resolutions. So the most problematic issue is the issue of voting of people who self-isolate. This is a critical element that should be regulated at a legislative level. Even if it is not regulated, we envisage a procedure to vote in this case. So we should regulate the order properly. So these categories that are envisaged, those people who self-isolate, they will be visited, and we will overcome the situation, but we should adopt this draft law. We hope that it will be considered and adopted. And in this way, we will be able to properly implement all the necessary measures in order that people be able to safely vote. And those voters who self-isolate also should be able to vote. We continue our discussion. It is really quick discussion. So what is the priority? The constitutional right to vote, or the right to safety, right to health and life? Maybe for you this is a question you understand clearly about the priority. At the same time, we would like to get an answer to this question. And also please tell us about the measures envisaged in the process of organization and preparation and holding of elections during election day in the conditions of the quarantine. Good afternoon. I wish everyone good health. First, I would like to answer about our priorities. Of course, the Constitution is the priority, and the rights to vote. This right is guaranteed by Constitution, and all our legal acts that are being developed and changes to Resolution 641, they provide for the rights of people to vote. If a person comes to a polling station, the temperature is taken, and if there is a heightened temperature and other signs of respiratory disease, this person is allowed to vote separately, and everyone is informed that there is a person with respiratory symptoms in order to have distance of not less than 1.5 meters, and people who come there, they will be asked to wear masks. This is the requirement of the day. The conditions of functioning under quarantine. So a person who came to polling station is obliged to wear a mask that covers nose and mouth. If person refuses to wear a mask, you should allow this person to vote, to implement voters' right, but in accordance with the process as concerns the person with respiratory disease symptoms. But after elections, they should be brought to administrative responsibility for violating current legislation because they attend public places while being ill, and the law enforcement should bring such a person to administrative responsibility for violation of the norms that were set. So we introduced changes to a resolution of the Cabinet of Ministers, and we adopted a separate order to provide for epidemic norms during the electoral process. We didn't limit any rights and freedoms of people. We provide the right to people to do everything that is envisaged by Constitution and concerning voters' rights. And also these norms that we set, they will prevent further spread of infection in the course of this process. We are speaking about temperature taking, also sanitizers, and near each table there shouldn't be more than 3 people in the queue. The queue should be clearly marked with proper marks where you should stop, and there should be people who control the number of people who are allowed to come in to vote. We recommend not to take children to the polling station and to clearly plan the schedule in order to avoid crowds at polling stations. We cannot regulate the numbers of monitors at the polling stations, and representatives of political forces, journalists, and I will speak about journalists separately. We cannot regulate their number. So the norm per square meter, it doesn't spread to the polling station, but at the same time we ask everyone, and this is provided in the resolution, that you should not create crowds inside, and you should wear a mask, and you should adhere to distance, because all this contributes to the prevention of spread of coronavirus infection. Journalists will be allowed to the polling stations, but we address to everyone, and in our provision we put this, that briefings about the results should be taken outside in order to avoid crowds. This is especially about politicians and top officials. Usually briefings were taken inside, and if weather permits, all materials should be, information materials should be placed outside in order that voters be able to calmly study these programs and biographies and other materials concerning candidates. So if we implement all these norms that are set by provision, the elections will take place in a good way without any violations. And we recommend everyone to wear masks and special glass shields in order to prevent infection. And also prescribed norms. The members of commissions, if some if one person fell ill, they are not sent to self-isolation, only in case if while preparing elections and during elections, everyone used personal protective equipment. Otherwise, there will be a risk of self-isolation of all these members of commissions. That's why we address the heads of the commissions. They should monitor the adherence to the rules, not only on the day of elections, but also in the course of preparation to the elections and after, when there will be vote counting. Thank you, Viktor. Zoya Lebid is with us. She coordinates OPORA work in Kirovohrad Oblast. Zoya, what is the situation at the local level? The work is ongoing in precinct commission, so what do you observe at a local level? How do they adhere to the measures? Good afternoon. We attended all the meetings of territorial commissions, the first meeting and territorial commissions and oblast commissions. Everyone was without masks, no disinfection measures. But as of today, a week ago, local councils provided means of disinfections to the territorial commissions, and after provision, they started to wear masks. And we will see how it will be in Godowska, for example, the Silivska settlements. We believe that we see that they wear masks when we are present, and they take them away when we leave. And what is the mechanism? So there is territorial commission, and we address them. We may file complaint to Oblast Territorial Commission, Central Commission, but it doesn't make much difference. Zoya, stay with us, please. Oleksandr, Slobozhan, please join us. You represent the Association of Cities of Ukraine. Do we have money in the budget for this? We understand that quality and safety of local elections depend on capabilities of local communities. Do we have reserves? Do we have money in the reserve funds? Thank you. Good afternoon. Recently, a notorious Resolution 846 was adopted. I will explain why I believe it is notorious. We carried out a survey. We have 911 municipalities where 85% of Ukrainians live. Resolution 846 shifted responsibility of financing of all the anti-epidemic measures, the adherence of conditions, provision of health of citizens. This responsibility was placed on the local budgets, and everyone responds calmly to these things. And I would like to disagree absolutely with Mr. Lyashko, because this is a direct violation of Constitution. A person, his life and dignity and security are the highest value in Ukraine. And if you put this so, for example, in Kiev, they have money for this, and in smaller cities, they do not have it. And the legislator takes decisions about the budget, and Article 210 identifies that financial provision of holding local elections is the responsibility of the state. Now we file a case to the court against this document because it contradicts the Constitution of Ukraine. If there is no money in the local budget for financing of these measures, and all the budgets are lacking this money. So now the health and life of 85% of people under threat. So we cannot do this in such a way. So also legislators envisaged coronavirus fund. We all know about it. And recently there was a press conference of accounting chamber head, and he said that from this coronavirus fund, no ventilators were bought from this fund. So this is about money spending. So our position is clear. We should cancel this resolution 846, and we should provide for health of our citizens through coronavirus fund. And you asked whether we have reserve funds in local governance. Even if we have them, the use of this money will lead to the fact that the accounting chamber or audit service, they will check how the money was spent, and they will find out that this money was spent in a wrongful way. So you know also about separate acts were taken concerning quarantine, and they were recognized as non-constitutional. As of today, local governance now is between Zoya and Eryna, and everyone understands that health should be protected, and everyone searches for money. And big cities, they do not face such a big problem with money. And the second problem, how to make it legally and in the right way. And for small cities and settlements, there is a problem first, where to find money, and also how to do it legally correct, because you should hold session, and on the 5th the campaign started, and electoral code envisages partization, and there is a politicization of this issue, and the only way how to resolve this problem is to I was preparing for this event, and I took this order from the cabinet about the financing, and the cabinet, and it should be done by the initiative of Mr. Lyashko, or there should be changes to this resolution, and there should be proper funding from the state. And if there is no money in coronavirus fund, they have reserve fund, and you may take this money from this reserve fund. And from the start of pandemic, local government bodies spend their own resources, and not only benefits from small business, speaking about social programs for vulnerable groups of population, only for protection equipment, 3.2 billion hryvnias. So this is an accounting chamber report under the site of Ministry of Finance and the State Treasury site.
That's why I'm stirring up all the public and calling the Cabinet of Ministers to make this proper decision. Do you know how many PP, like masks, etc., masks are needed in the polling stations for the territorial election commission members? How much money is needed to for disposal of that masks later, and for sanitizers, that is to ensure safety of members at the polling stations? Our calculation suggests that it is 1,500 500 million hryvnia. 500 million hryvnia. When the first wave of COVID-19 came, the municipalities had procured all that personal PPE, personal protection equipment. So they bigger cities do not have these problems. The biggest problem is with smaller cities, with towns, etc. And because we expect that the load in smaller cities and towns, the load in polling stations, the number of visitors will be much bigger than usually. If we speak about the number of election precincts, we have more than 28,000, 28,500 approximately of polling stations, and around 500,000 of people will be involved to that, to the work on that polling stations and election precincts, and the cabinet of ministers has to decide what measures specific should be taken. My question to Mr. Lyashko, publication Kamora in Znamenka, keeping inside that some people who might be infected with COVID, they will participate in elections in separate cabins, etc., who then will process that ballots, etc. When we speak about the resolution of 846, please do not say that you want to repeal it as a whole. You want to edit or repeal only one provision about funding. This very provision was inserted by the Ministry of Finance. All the rest was drafted and formulated by the Ministry of Health. We meant that the anti-epidemic measures might be funded from the local budgets. While this is one norm. The second norm is that the Ministry of Finance introduced second provision that it should be funded from that. The answer to your question, the source of infection for COVID-19 is the drop aerial and drop away, which means that when you breathe out drops of liquid which contains viruses, this is the source of infection. That's why we suggested that a person, a voter, should be in masks and the infection only through the skin. When members of commission process the ballots which are put in the boxes, ballot boxes, this could not be a source of infection. Nevertheless, we suggest them to wear gloves and not to touch noses, eyes, etc. The second question, whether premises at schools will be disinfected, because schools are usually turned into polling stations, and whether this will be disinfected before children would be allowed to go to school. As you know, schools and hospitals are seen as special objects. Currently, parents are not allowed to enter schools, and the same is true for the hospitals now. So we expect that when the schools would be turned into polling stations, and in this situation, we advise to have the entrance to the polling station separately from the entrance to the school. Yesterday, we had a special meeting with the educators. We discussed the following suggestion, that the autumn vacations for children would be shifted 2 weeks, and in order to coincide with the period of elections. And then the next suggestion was to use sports halls, which are gymnastic halls in each school, in order to offer bigger premises. The second, then after election, the school would stay closed for children for several days of vacations. The next is that we suggest to keep children of different ages in different classrooms, and thus prevent the infections. About the measures for the members of election committees and polling stations that would be organized in the hospitals, the same measures as for the schools would be taken. They would be taken a special, they would take a special entries. They will have all the protective measures. And for patients in hospital with lower immunities, this excessive protective measures should be taken. We have many polling stations which are to be opened in schools, in civil institutions like research institutions, and in hospitals. They have to be opened 15 days prior to the election day. Is it right that the protection measures in those places, I mean in polling stations, are again put on the principals of the schools, chief doctors of the hospitals, CEOs of the hospitals? Again, when we look at the resolution of 846, it puts this responsibility on the heads of those institutions, school principals, chief doctors of the hospitals, and CEOs of the research organizations which host the polling stations. Of course, that people are able to organize this, to mobilize sanitizers and masks, but how to isolate the additional danger for the voters, they I'm afraid they are unable. Well, listening to Mr. Lyashko, I have heard that the Minister of Finance offered some provision. We voted for it. We introduced it. We have a good Ukrainian saying, say to my younger brother to order the youngest brother to tie our calf to the fence. This actually brightly illustrates what's going to happen now. Somebody puts responsibility on somebody else in lower position. That person in lower position puts responsibility to the lower level, and etc. And we won't find somebody who is eventually responsible for everything. You might expect that the election process would be complicated, that people will submit claims to courts if they lose elections, etc. I do not understand why that budget, special fund in the national budget allocated for COVID-19. This is 2.3 billion hryvnia. The amount of MPs fund which is allocated to MPs for the good projects in the constituencies also amounts to 2 billion hryvnia. So that's not, these are almost equal figures. Well, when the elections were planned, the decision was made at the governmental level that 9.6 billion hryvnia would be taken from the subventions allocated for local budgets, and then allocated to the COVID-19 fund, and then go to the regions. I agree with the Ministry of Health. When it comes to the sanitary measures, the ministry provided all necessary recommendations, and unless that very small provision about funding is formulated properly, the responsibility for protection measures would be laid on somebody at the local level who is unable to allocate enough money. When we have floods in the Carpathian Mountains, we calculate how much we need to rescue the environment after the flood. Then you submit this amount of money to the budget managers, and they allocate money for that, and that's it. Here again, the situation is similar. If somebody happens at the polling station, and director of this polling station, or better to say, director of that educational institution, will be a responsibility. Okay, and somebody will submit claim to court, then that school or university would be recognized as guilty, then money again, that fine, would go back to the national budget. Saying this, I mean that we should not look for money now. We should just make decision about compensations to those institutions which would allocate money for sanitary measures. Otherwise, we will have a series of mutual blamings from the participants of different political trends, and they will complain against each other for the violation of epidemic rules. Even now, we have complaints that there is lack of cleaning staff at the polling stations who have to ensure that disinfection, that excessive cleaning, etc. The next question: if all the if all the election committee would go to self-isolation after elections, what would be the procedure of work with the ballots? How they would be processed in this case? Or even now, we have the procedure for the election committees, and we will do these measures on the election day, just like it works now. We simply appoint the substitutes to all the committee members. Actually, the cases when people unexpectedly fall ill is not something very specific for the country, and the procedure is in place. And we mentioned that processing the ballots, members of the election committee should wear gloves, should be in masks, and actually these are sufficient protective measures to prevent any infection. Victor, we have two questions to you in relation to the raising cases of COVID-19 in the country. Is there any risk that the elections would be postponed? And the second question, whether there might be misinformation as to the number of cases. So answering your second question first, I encourage you to use our official website. We provide accurate figures. The second, answering your first question, actually, the postponement of elections is possible only according to the Constitution. That is only to the extraordinary situation in this country in line with the Constitution. Unless this situation is passed by the Parliament, it's not possible. Sometimes we hear about the measures of administrative pressure on elections, especially in small cities and towns. For example, in small amalgamated communities. The lack of money is a source of minor violations. For example, the ballots could be kept in a pen because the safe case was not provided by the local authorities. I invite Mr. Rybachok to join us. Do you think that COVID is a risk for local elections? It's quite clear that COVID-19 and pandemic could be seen as a big threat. In June, we presented our first report, which was called elections during pandemic. At that time, that topic was not seen as the interesting topic. The government was not thinking carefully about elections, and in result of that negligence, we have discovered that 4 weeks prior to the elections, we are almost totally unprepared, and we suddenly discovered that we had to start many processes long ago. As for the funding of the local elections, I fully agree with my colleagues, because from the very beginning we kept saying that the government had to think carefully. Actually, here we are speaking about 150-200 million hryvnia. That's not huge amount of money. It would be possible to allocate that small amount of money from the COVID-19 fund and to procure all necessary masks, sanitizers, gloves, etc. from this source of funding. Why the government is unable to supply all the polling stations, all the local election committees with all that PPE. It's a secret to me. As for the CMU resolution that you mentioned, I think that it's better to have any resolution than to have no resolution in general. But you asked questions about disinfection, about cleaning, about measuring temperatures. We don't think that the election committee members should act as cleaning staff or as nurses or medical staff. That's why we think that we should keep this in mind. And the third, we have very big cautions that much lesser amount of people would go to the polling stations because of the pandemic. For example, when the pandemic just started in March in Kharkiv, at the additional elections, only 24% of voters came to polling stations. That's why the state, the government has to ensure that voting is safe and to convince people to come to polling stations. And one more risk is that local politicians might spread fake information that here and there voting is not safe, that you risk going to the polling station, etc. In general, at the local elections, we see very low figures of voters and very low attendance in general. So there is additional threat to this. So I believe that central funding should be provided to remove these threats as much as possible. Roman, how international experience of elections in pandemic could be applied to Ukraine? We've been existing in the pandemic atmosphere for a rather long period of time, and because many countries had to undergo elections during these many months of pandemic, and we tried to sum up that experience. In the result of Ukrainian elections, again, we expect to produce such a report. We collect data and submit this data, provide them to the Central Election Commission. They try to apply positive experience from other countries. This is very good. From the experience of other countries, we understood that communication with the voters is of primarily importance. It is very important to explain how to vote safely, what could be done, what should not be done at the polling station. So the sanitary and epidemic safety of people coming to polling stations will be the primarily importance. Also, there is a threat which was mentioned about misinformation, about misleading, about frightening people, etc. What could we advise to all the participants of the election process? To keep coordination between the Central Election Committee and the Ministry of Health, to strengthen the cooperation between local authorities and the Ministry of Health. As far as I know, the Central Election Committee plans to organize several communication events devoted to raising the public awareness about safety of voting. Vitaliy, I know that you have to leave now. Could you mention what urgent actions should be done to protect people and not violate their rights? All the speakers today mentioned financial provision of the elections, and I agree with all the experts and Mr. Slobozhan that this should be done from the national budget and should not be a burden for local budgets. As for the protection of people, you might recollect the draft law 4818. I do not expect that it would be voted by the elections, and the local election committee should rely on the effective legislation. and not expect that that bill would be passed by elections. So, dear colleagues, let us start our Q&A session. Please don't forget to represent yourselves.
No questions. Dear colleagues, we are going to end our press conference, but I would like to give you the floor to speak about additional measures to overcome the situation. I believe that everything depends on voters and adherence to distance, and everything is known what we should do. And when we are in public places, we should adhere to the norms. And as Roman mentioned, we will have many materials, education materials at polling stations that will be about the rules to be observed during voting. And voters who come to polling stations, they should plan their visit in order to minimize the time in the premise of voting, to get the ballots, to vote, and leave right away, and not to heighten the risks for the members of commission, for monitors and other voters. There are many organizational issues connected with education, with information for the EC that will be created in the nearest future. So the key issue of financing should be resolved, and all the challenges will be overcome quickly, because we are ready for this election. We need proper financing to overcome the challenges. I will be brief. I would like to say that electoral code is rather complicated. If there is a legislative act that is difficult, it is difficult to implement for commissions. Today, if you're speaking about CEC or the Ministry of Healthcare, they do a good job. There are some questions to the Ministry of Finance. I mean, they know what to do. There are many technical aspects. How to finance, who will clean. You said about this information, and Denise mentioned this. There is one more aspect, and Vitaliy mentioned it. In such conditions of lack of dialogue between local government and central power, even everything is provided for, this would these things may be used for PR that the state didn't provide, and some forces may use the situation. Some administrative pressure may appear. Denise mentioned about turnout. Someone may see low turnout of voters, and there may be some myths about it. Someone will bring people and provide PPE to them. So there should be proper dialogue between local government and central power. And we addressed the president to have the meeting concerning 6 issues. One of them is provisional and transparent electoral process. Now we have problem of pressure on behalf of law enforcement bodies, and some provisions are provided. They try to bring some heads of cities to responsibility. So there should be financing, educational work, and also the healthcare ministry should provide for this, and the president should discuss this issue with local with mayors. before pandemic, the president met mayors and he spoke with them how to, and then the country didn't feel this big risk. And now there is a question. Mr. President, please meet the mayors, discuss these issues in order to find this, and they will find this funding because they want to provide for the rights of our citizens and the implementation. So we have elections on 25th of October. We have 3 weeks to prepare. So now the floor is given to Denis Rybachok. I believe we should all understand that pandemic is not a verdict for election. It is possible to hold elections in pandemic if we establish proper mechanisms and if we implement the rules. International experience shows that countries feared to hold elections during pandemic. Then they understood that they should hold them no matter what. Poland, Montenegro, they held elections. They set rules and hold elections. It is possible, and I like experience of South Korea. They held parliamentary elections in April with record turnout. It shows that it is possible to work properly with voters and the system works efficiently. And I agree with Oleksandr. I believe this is an illustration why we don't need this additional load to local governments. Yes, the president may meet with them, but heads, the mayors, they are political competitors. This is a different story. This is campaigning, and there shouldn't be any administrative resource use. That's why, in order to avoid this, the state should decide. But they have chosen another way, and I don't believe that this is a correct way. Please, Alexander. One remark. I agree with Denis, and we wrote that the only guarantor is the president. He is not the president of the party. He is the president of the country, and they, as mayors, they are the participants of the electoral process, and he should be a guarantor. If some things are violated by the cabinet or by say other bodies, the violation of constitution, he should intervene. So we see this resolution as a violation. This is not about money. Money will be found, but the matter is the adherence to constitutional rights. I would like to voice 2 more questions. Maybe there may be online version of elections. No, there is no such opportunity. Are there any limitations? Some meetings with voters? Do we have limitations in holding meetings with voters? What is the number of participants, the conditions of holding these meetings, and what is the document that regulates this issue? So this is resolution 641. This is about the measures of that should be implemented during campaigning. There should be proper measures implemented to avoid, to prevent spread of infection. Zoya, Lebid, what else should be done in order to hold elections in conditions of pandemic? From our side, we will provide education to our voters. They should have PPE. They should have separate routes for those who have some signs of illness. We should provide education for our voters. So you should take care of yourself if you want to vote, and we should take care also of voters. I would like to say that when elections happen and the report will be written on elections as usual, other countries will be interested because they will know that the elections were held properly in the conditions of COVID-19. So we should educate our voters on how to behave in conditions of COVID-19. Also, we should tell the voters about the process because we have the new bulletin and maybe some people will find it difficult. Also, this may, we should inform people on how to do it, how to vote properly, and this is a component that should be dealt with before elections. Thank you, dear colleagues. I will wear a mask and gloves. I won't take my child to the station. I will go to vote on the 25th of October. And thank you very much.